So we are beginning volume 16, and we begin at July the 23rd, 1923. And for a few messages, we're going to be talking about the divine will. Luisa said, "I was abandoning all of myself in the holy divine will, according to my usual way. And my sweet Jesus made himself seen, coming towards me in order to receive me in his most holy will." Now she actually sees him coming to absorb her into himself. He said, "My daughter, my will is in continuous encounter with the human will." That's a very important statement. "And as the human will encounters mine, it receives light, sanctity, and strength, which my will contains." So the more we encounter the divine will, the more we receive light, sanctity, and strength. "My will," Jesus said, "is in the continuous act of giving itself to souls, in order to give the soul the life of heaven in advance." In other words, living in the divine will is actually living the life of the blessed down here on the earth. "If she receives me," notice the if clause, she, the soul, remains with this celestial life. We have divine life. "But if in every act they do, souls do not receive this supreme volition, which is all intent for their good, on making them happy, strong, holy, divine, and as though transformed into a dawn of celestial light. If they don't, they remain with their human will alone, which renders them weak, miserable, muddy, and surrounds them with vile passions such as to arouse pity." Now, you're given both examples there with extraordinary comparison, because by volume 16, if we haven't shifted, the Lord has got to put a bomb under it. And what he's trying to say, now, this message is not for people living different kinds of spiritual lives. This is for people living in the divine will, and you don't say this to anybody else. I think that's important to say that. You don't make a comparison with this spirituality and other spiritualities. It's very different, because we're dealing with the crown of all spirituality, and the other spiritualities are all preparation for this. So it's at this level that if you don't cooperate with the divine will, that in the eyes of the Lord, it's just horrendous, because he's ready to give us absolutely his highest and his best. "Don't you see how many souls drag themselves along?" Look at that expression. "Because of their weakness in being unable to conquer themselves to do good." Now, the worst of all failures in life is not to conquer yourself. We have had Alexander the Great conquering the whole of the Middle East. We were dealing with that today in our scripture class. He didn't conquer himself. And he died an unconquered person at the age of 32, which I think is utterly crazy. So I want to give you Jeremiah 16:17 for that. Jeremiah 16:17. So, "How many souls drag themselves along because of their weakness in being unable to conquer themselves to do good. Others who don't know how to dominate themselves." So there you have the lack of self-control pointed out. "Others who are inconstant like reeds." Now, do you remember Matthew 7:25, "By their fruits you will know them"? And you also have Jesus, I forgot to write this one down, saying that John the Baptist was not like a reed in the wind. He was stable. Okay. So these people are like reeds blowing in the wind. "Others who don't know how to pray without 1,000 distractions." That means that their mind is not fixed on the Lord. Okay? "And others are always discontent." So if we're discontent, we are certainly not surrendered to the divine will. So the Lord is giving us major discernment here, and maybe you could put a heading there for yourself. major discernment. In other words, he's telling you to take the thermometer and see just how you're doing in your journey into divine will. Others who seem to even born to do evil. These are all souls who do not encounter my will in all of their things. Now, according to these writings, your things are thoughts, words, deeds, actions, movements, steps. They're all your things. Yet my will is there for all because you wouldn't exist without it. And because they shun the divine will, they do not receive the good which the divine will contains. And this is a just pain for one who wants to live of her own will, involving herself in all kinds of miseries. Now, the Lord says that the misery you have in staying at the level of the human will, when you know that there's a higher level you can go to, that it's a just misery. I think that's interesting. It's a just pain. However, this will of mine, which they did not want, that's the souls we've just been talking about, they didn't want to encounter in life, when the divine will would have given them many goods for as many times as they would encounter it. They will encounter the divine will in death, giving them as many pains for as many times as they shunned it. Ouch. In other words, if you absolutely refuse to encounter the divine will and let it give you all the life and the good during lifetime, you have to face it in death anyway. Because by shunning the divine will, they have rendered themselves guilty, and they've stained themselves and covered themselves with mud. Now, several times in the early volumes, up to about, I would be thinking, volume 8 or 9, Jesus had to warn Luisa that she wasn't considering what he was doing seriously enough, and that if she pulled away from him, that it would actually be serious sin. And he would actually stop the relationship she had. In fact, I think it's in volume 9 or 10, he said to her, I would reduce you back to where you were at the beginning. You'd get out of that bed and nobody would ever know you'd sat there. He said, I'll just restore your normal health, but you'll have none of the graces, none of the gifts. But you'll have all the judgment that goes with rejecting this incredible gift. And it was the one time when he gave her a very severe wake-up call, because she was very severely tempted at the time. And so here we're being given a wake-up call, that if we don't deal with and cooperate with the divine will in all our dealings during life, you'll have to deal with them eventually. So he says, it's just that they receive a pain, and as many painful encounters form for them for as many times as they've not encountered my will upon the earth. But these painful encounters will be without merits, without new gains, as would have happened if they had encountered my will. So if they have to encounter it after death, there's no merit after death. It's only during your lifetime you're allowed to merit. Okay. So he said, how many moans of sorrow, I think there shouldn't be an S there, come from the prisons of purgatory. I would say prison without the S again. They love putting everything into the plural. How many shouts of desperation can be heard from hell because my will was not encountered on the earth. Now, encountered means that you enter into communion with the divine will and you allow the divine will to do the work that he wants to do in us. Therefore, my daughter, may your first act be to encounter my will. May your first thought and heartbeat be to encounter the eternal heartbeat of my will, that you may receive all of my love. Now, the first act is both the first act in the morning and the very first thing you do anytime you turn to God, the very first thing. So we've trained ourselves that the first thing you do is fuse in the divine will. So you enter into the divine will. And then any prayer you want after that. Try to make continuous encounters in everything. This is actually very important. And the Lord has, he has repeated this message a number of times since volume 12. And that is that Many people think it's enough to say their prevenient act in the morning, and then maybe once or twice during the day they just repeat another one. But he says no, continuously enter into the divine will. And that is that you are consciously entering into the divine will at every moment. Okay. So try to make continuous encounters in everything, that you may be transformed in my will and I in yours. That's John 14:20-21. You in me and I in you. So as to dispose yourself to make the final encounter with my will at your last hour. So the surrender we make to the divine will in our last breath should be your PhD. It shouldn't be your first practice. And it shouldn't be, oh, by the way, I better do this. Well, I'm dying, so I better do this. Some people only make a surrender in their dying, but that's not enough. They will be saved, but it's not enough. In this way, he said, you will have no painful encounter after death. Okay. So, July the 24th, 1923. And here we get a very, very important statement by Jesus that the divine will contains the whole of the divine being. That's why refusing it is very, very serious. Luisa said, I was feeling very oppressed because of the privation of my beloved Jesus. I was saying to myself, everything is over for me. As much as I look for him, he doesn't come. What torture, what martyrdom. But while I was thinking of this, my adorable Jesus made himself seen as crucified, laying himself over my poor person. See, the two of them are one, and she sees everything visually. She's not an intellectual person. If she was an intellectual person, the Lord would give her messages and ideas. But because she's a visual person and not an intellectual, the Lord teaches her through visual images. There are two types of people spiritually, and we literally call them intellectuals, and I forget what we call the other one, but it means people who, imaginatives, that's it. One group are called intellectuals and the other group are called imaginatives. The intellectuals operate according to ideas, and the imaginatives need pictures. But this very same revelation can be given either way. Very often the intellectuals think that the imaginatives are much lower than them because their intellect is obviously higher according to themselves. But in actual fact, when you look at what was revealed to Luisa, it was the highest level of mystical theology. And the intellectuals have to really work on this to work out what's actually being said. So the fact that it comes to you as one or the other doesn't actually matter, because God has allowed these two types to develop. But it's the reason why Luisa sees everything in images and pictures. Okay. So Jesus eventually came. He laid himself over my poor person, and a light that came out from within his adorable forehead. Now, the forehead is considered by everybody to be the wall protecting the intellect. They always consider the intellect behind your forehead, and that's why Eastern religions, like the Hindus and others, put a spot there. That's their commitment. And that's why you're told in the book of Revelation that the beast will demand a spot either on your forehead or on your hand, the mark. Okay. The spot on your forehead doesn't have to be physical. Many people think it is. And they think it's this chip, that's going into the hands. It's not that at all. The spot on the forehead means what you have given your intellect to. Yeah, and you've got the three powers of the soul, the intellect, memory, and the will. Now, what you give your intellect to is the spot on the forehead. What you work for is the spot on your hands. And you work for what you've given yourself to, hence the spot on both places. And the reason why I'm calling it a spot is that many of these Eastern religions actually put a spot on the forehead. And ancient religions did that as well, put a spot actually on the forehead. So Luisa said that a light came out from within his forehead, and he said, "My daughter, my will contains my whole being." If you ever colour anything, colour that. "And one who possesses my will within herself possesses me, more than if she had my continuous presence." And this is very important because in the first 4 volumes particularly, Luisa was having apparitions of Jesus every single day, and sometimes several times a day. And she thought the important thing was to actually see him, and he had to slowly teach her that you have him all the time, absolutely fully, if your will is committed to his, and your will and his will become one. So you possess God and he possesses you. That's called union with God. And union with God is required in the spirituality of the divine will. In the early volumes, the teaching on getting onto the higher planes is very, very clear. So once you shift beyond volume 12, the Lord makes it perfectly clear that for someone to actually live in the divine will 24/7, 365, union with God is required. So you cannot be somebody further down the line. You absolutely cannot. And what you'll find is that if somebody gets to this in the readings, they slip away. They can no longer tolerate it. It's not meaningful to them. Is that okay? So, my daughter, my will contains my whole being. And one who possesses the divine will within herself possesses me. And they possess me more than if they had my continuous presence. In fact, my will penetrates everywhere. That's Psalm 139. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your face? If I go to the heavens, you are there. If I go into the depths of Sheol, you are there. Okay. So, my will penetrates everywhere into her innermost fibres. Now, when you're doing the hours of the Passion, you will hear Luisa, especially, no, she does it in the agony in the garden as well. But at various times, she will tell you that Jesus was suffering in the very fibres of his being, in the innermost parts of his being. So the innermost fibres means everything in you is given, okay? Now that's the fulfillment of Deuteronomy 6, 4-10. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all of your being. The divine will counts her heartbeats and her thoughts. The divine will makes itself the life of the most beautiful part of the creature, which of course is your spirit, your soul, her interior, from which her external works arise. You see, and the value of the external works is the value of what's going on in the interior. On the other hand, which is very Jewish on the one hand and on the other hand, okay? On the other hand, if my presence does not find my will in the soul, it cannot be the life of her interior. So if the divine will is not in union with our will, then our works are just not coming from that. You're coming from yourself. Okay? And she remains as though separated from me. How many souls, after having enjoyed my favours and my presence, because the fullness of my will, its light, its sanctity, was not in them. See, he's giving discernment here again. Have engulfed themselves in sin again and have taken part in pleasures and have separated from me, because that divine will, which renders the soul untouchable by any sin, even the slightest, was not in them. That's 1 John 3, verses 2-6. 1 John 3, verses 2-6. John says that a person who's truly in union with God cannot sin. How do you know? Hebrews 12:14. Nothing unholy or unworthy can ever enter the presence of God. So, therefore, the purest, the holiest, the greatest works are formed in one who possesses all the fullness of my will. So, what we do for God depends on the level that the divine will is working in us. Is that okay? And what the Lord is doing here now is giving us very, very important discernment so that we are able to begin to touch what's actually going on inside of us. Okay. You see, the divine will renders the soul untouchable by any sin, and that is because God is holy. That's Leviticus 19:2. I am holy, you shall be holy, for I am holy, says the Lord. You remember Exodus 3, verses 1 to 10, where Moses was told, take off your shoes, this is holy ground. Remember that? Exodus 3, verses 1 to 10. And Moses at that stage was not living in union with God, so he had no right to come closer. Moses had to go through a lot of purification to get to that stage. So if we have not put sin out of our lives and have not put self out of our lives, forget about it. The divine will has not taken over. Simple as that. So that's number one. Now, number two is, see, in the creature also, her human will has supremacy. You need the word human there. Her human will has supremacy. In other words, that's what's ruling the roost. So if there is a will, she has life. And if there's no will, she's like the tree. While having a trunk, branches and leaves, it has no fruit. Okay. So in the human creature, the will is not the thought, but it gives life to the attitude of the mind. It's not the eye, but it gives life to the gaze. Because if it has will, the eye wants to see and wants to know things. Otherwise, it is the eye has no life. Now, when it says no life here, it doesn't have any reason for operating. The will is not the word. Now, the first thing is that you were told, the will is not the thought. Okay. Now you're told, secondly, the will is not the word. Okay. But it gives life to each word. It's not the hand, but it gives life to each action. It's not the step, but it gives life to the step. It's not love, desire, affection, but it gives life to love, desire, and affection. And this isn't all. Through the will, through the will is the life of all the human acts. Though the will is the life of all the human acts, once the creature has performed them, she remains stripped of these acts. In other words, look at this. Just look for a second. There's an action. It's finished. It's over. There's nothing else. If it's in the divine will, it lasts forever. If it's only in the human will, it's finished. As soon as you've done it, it's over. Okay. So that's what they're saying here. Once she has performed them, she remains stripped of these very acts. And like a tree loaded with its fruit, it's stripped by the hands of the one who picks them. On the other hand, the gazes she has given, the thoughts she has formed, the words that she has spoken, the actions that she has performed, they remain as though sealed within her will. So her hand has operated, but her action does not remain in her hands. It moves beyond, and who knows where it goes. While in the will, it remains there. Therefore, everything is written, formed, sealed in the human will. In other words, as the originator of absolutely everything. And if it is so with the human will, and only because I cast into it the seed, the likeness of his divine will, think yourself of what my will must be like within yourself. Because then, if the divine will is the origin of absolutely everything, all these thoughts, words, desires, actions, steps, and all the rest of it, all have an eternal value and will last forever. And so you're being shown the two levels all the time. And what it must be if the creature allows herself to be possessed by my will. So the two levels are being made very, very clear to us in those messages. Is that all right? So July the 27th, 1923, Everything's going to happen to Luisa first in the divine will, and then afterwards the door is open for the rest of us. That's July the 27th, 1923. This morning my sweet Jesus made himself seen in a wonderful way. He was standing upon my heart, and on it he placed 2 bars over which he had formed an arch. And in the middle of the arch he had fixed a little wheel with 2 ropes. That's a lot of activity, isn't it? One on the right and the other on the left, and a little bucket hanging from it. And Jesus, all in a hurry, would make the little bucket descend into my heart, and then he would pull it up full of water and pour it out over the world. Now, beside that, put John 7:37 to 39. If you come and drink, out of your own heart will flow fountains of living water for others. Okay, there's plenty left over for others. He kept drawing and pouring in such a way as to flood the earth. Now, the flooding of the earth is all this intercession and penance and reparation that Luisa is doing. It was delightful to see Jesus as though hurrying, dripping with sweat because of the effort he made in drawing so much water. I thought to myself, how is it that so much water comes out of my heart, which is so small? And when did he put it there? At least Luisa is very conscious of the fact that the source would be God, not herself. And blessed Jesus made me understand that all that apparatus was nothing other than his will, which with so much goodness had operated upon me. So this little drawing water from the well is simply an image of the divine will operating in her. The waters he was drawing were the sayings and the teachings about his adorable will, which he had placed in my heart as though in deposit, and which more than water, now you see, water is a symbol of both grace and salvation, okay? And if you know it's a symbol of grace and salvation, then you know what's been going on flooding the earth, okay? So he was wanting to water the church, pouring in grace and salvation, in order to give her the knowledge of his will, so that it might be fulfilled as he wants. So as he wants is the fulfillment of the Our Father, okay? So I want to give you Hosea 4:6 and Jeremiah 5:4. Now, Hosea 4:6 says that without knowledge the people perish. So all down the centuries, the Lord has been pouring more and more and more knowledge into the church through the saints and the mystics, so that the church would never be at a point where it didn't have the knowledge that he wanted her to have. 5:4. Then Jesus told me, my daughter, I did this in the incarnation. First I deposited in my dear mother all the goods which were needed so that I might descend from heaven to earth. And then I incarnated myself, forming the deposit of my very life. From my mother, this deposit came out as full of life, as life for all. Sorry, it should be life for all, I think. The same will be with my will. It's necessary that I make the deposit of the goods, the effects, the prodigies, and the knowledge it contains. And after I have formed the deposit in you, then will it make its way and give itself to the other creatures. So the deposit is in Luisa, and then there is as much as we want. The bank is there for us. Therefore, see, everything is prepared. The deposit is almost complete. There's nothing left but to dispose the first ones in order to make it known. So the first ones to enter the divine will are the people alive at the same time as Luisa. First of all, the priests like Hannibal de Francia, the sisters and the priests that he found the 2 congregations for. They are the very first people to pick up the divine will. So first I need to dispose the first ones in order to make it known that it may remain, so it doesn't remain without its fruit. So July the 30th, 1923. The soul who enters the divine will is the celestial flower. In other words, really living in the divine will 24/7, 365. Jesus said, is a new baptism. You begin to live a completely new life. Now, a baptism cuts out all the past, as you know, and opens up a completely new future. Now, he has said that already in the volumes before this. So Luisa said, I was fusing myself in the holy divine will, and my sweet Jesus on coming told me, my daughter, every time the soul enters into my will to pray, notice we have to do it every time, to pray, to work, and to do all the other things, she receives as many divine colours, one more beautiful than the other. It depends on whether it's prayer or work or self-denial or reparation or whatever. He calls that a colour, like the different colours in the rainbow. Don't you see how much variety of colour and of beauty all nature contains? These are the shadows of the variety of colours and beauty which my divinity contains, because the whole universe reflects the glory of God. But whence do plants and flowers acquire such variety of colours? To whom did I give the office to colour so many varieties of plants with such varied shades? I gave it to the sun. Its light and its heat contain fecundity and variety of colours, such as to embellish the whole earth. And if the plant merely exposes itself to the kisses of its light, to the embraces of its heat, the flower opens up, and as though returning its kiss and its embrace, it receives the shadows of colours and forms the beautiful complexion. Now, what he's trying to say to us here is, the plants only have to expose themselves, and the sun does its work. Now, he's telling us to enter into the divine will, expose ourselves to the divine will, and the divine will do its work. It isn't difficult. So the sun symbolises the divine will, and the flower, which has been fecundated and made beautiful and everything, symbolises the soul. So the soul that enters into my will is symbolised by the flower that exposes itself to receive the kiss and the embrace of the sun in order to receive the various colours that the sun contains. And by returning them, she receives the different colours of the divine nature. So what is happening to us every single time we fuse in the divine will, and we should do it as often as possible every day, single day, we are being divinized. God can only make you like himself. There isn't another model. And so he wants to divinize us and have all this going on at the divine level. So she receives the different colours of the divine nature. The different colours are the wisdom and the sanctity and the holiness and the purity and all the rest of it of the divine will. Truly, the soul is the celestial flower, which the eternal sun, by the breath of its light. Now, I love that expression. The breath of God is the Holy Spirit. The light of God is God himself. So it's the breath of the Holy Spirit working in us, has coloured so well as to perfume heaven and earth and delight the very divinity and the whole celestial court with her beauty. The rays of my will empty her of what is human and fill her with what is divine. It happens every single time, another little bit, another little bit, another little bit. As we watch my garden very slowly, another tiny little bit change. With us, it's very slow as well. We're only able to cope with slow change. Most of us are not able to cope with very fast change. So one can see in the soul the beautiful rainbow of my attributes. That means all the virtues, all the attributes of God, the wisdom, the mercy, the forgiveness, the justice, the holiness, everything, the purity, everything. Therefore, my daughter, enter often into my will. Do you see it there? Fuse as often as you can. Just write fuse at the side. Fuse into the divine will as often as possible. To receive the shades and the various colours of the likeness of your Creator. So again, to use a completely different image, it's like doing a jigsaw puzzle. And every time you pick up one of the pieces, that wonderful picture develops. And the Lord says every time we fuse in his divine will, that wonderful divine image is developed in us. So August the 1st, 1923, this is a beautiful one, the I love you of God. It's all over the place. This is a very great help to the rounds, this one. Luisa said, I was feeling very afflicted because today my son, Jesus, did not rise over my poor soul. So she's all in shadows and darkness. Oh God, what pain to spend one day without the sun. It's always nighttime. Now, while I was feeling pierced in my soul, I had the good fortune of looking at the starry sky. I added the word fortune to make it English. I had the good fortune at looking at the starry sky, and I said to myself, how can it be that my sweet Jesus no longer remembers anything? I love that. I don't know how the goodness of his heart can bear not letting the sun of his lovable presence rise. When he told me that he would not be able to endure without coming to his little daughter because the little ones cannot be too long without their father. Now put St. Therese in the margin, because that's actually a summary of St. Therese's testimony, that there was absolutely no way she could be without the Lord at all. But she did not need the apparitions that Luisa needed. And Therese used to say that she would keep looking at the clouds until the clouds would part and she'd see the sky. Luisa's in a different place to that, but the two of them know this very simple thing, that a child can't be without its father. So many are their needs that the father is forced to be with them and watch over them and guard them and nourish them. Now, that's the little one. So 2 Corinthians 12:9. You'd never think I prepared this, because often the scriptures only come to me when I'm actually doing it for you. 2 Corinthians 12:9, my power is at best in weakness. Okay. Does he not remember when he would carry me outside of myself and take me up there, even under the vault of the heavens, in the midst of the celestial spheres, and strolling together with him? Isn't that absolutely incredible? Do you remember Genesis 3? Genesis 3. Now, I'm not sure if it's verse 8. God walked with Adam in the cool of the day. Do you remember? Yeah. So strolling together with him. And you also have Proverbs 8:31. The Lord delights to be with the children of men. Strolling together with him, I would impress my I love you on each star and in each sphere. Well, that was an advantage over you and me, that she was actually up there doing her rounds of creation among the stars. That must have been an awful lot easier. So, I think it's fantastic. She said, I seem to see in each star my I love you. So she's looking at the result of doing the rounds of creation. It seems to me that in that glittering of light that forms around the stars, they resound among themselves with my I love you, Jesus. Yet he doesn't listen to it, he doesn't come. He does not let his sun rise, which eclipsing all the stars with my I love you may make them one with his own. And so rising again in the midst of the celestial spheres, I impress a new I love you. That's each time we do the rounds of creation. We put a new layer. So there's going to be a whole layer of I love yous from all of us on the whole of creation. And apparently every time you say it, it's an indelible mark. Now, the way I like to put it for myself is you've written your signature on each one of the stars. Some years ago, for a birthday gift, it was a significant birthday, somebody gave me a certificate in which I could name an actual star. Have you seen that? Mm-hmm. And the name I gave the star, that gave me exactly where it is in the celestial spheres and everything. It's now registered in London in the place where they register the names of the stars. And the name I gave was Ego Amy. That's God's name. I said, your own name is written on one of the stars. I'm sure his name is written on more than one. Do you know what I mean? But we just don't know that. But every time you put your I love you on the whole starry heavens, your signature is on creation, which I think is fantastic. And that's what I call the rounds of creation, my signature on what he has done. And apparently it means an awful lot to him that you put your signature onto, because you put your signature, it's your agreement that you'll pay this amount or whatever it is, or you'll agree to this arrangement. So rising again in the midst of the celestial spheres, I impress a new I love you, Jesus. Oh, please, oh stars, cry out loudly, make my I love you resound. Now for that you need Psalm 19, verses 1 to 6, that all of the stars are crying out, but in a mute language. To make my I love you resound, so that touched Jesus may come to his little daughter, to his little exiled one. O Jesus, come, give me your hand, let me enter into your holy will, so that I may fill the whole atmosphere, the azure heavens, the light of the sun, the air, the sea, everything with my I love you. Now, isn't that a lovely way to fuse at the beginning of the rounds of creation? Because we always need new ideas how to do things. And with my kisses, so that wherever you may be, if you look, you may look at my I love you and at my kisses. If you hear, you may hear my I love you and the smacking kiss of my kisses. If you speak and you breathe, you may breathe my I love you and my anguishing kisses. If you work, my I love yous may flow in your hands. If you walk, if you tread, my I love you and the roaring of my kisses under my steps. Notice the way she's describing kisses in different ways. May my I love you be the chain that draws you to me, and may my kisses be the powerful magnet which, whether you want it or not, may force you to visit the one who cannot live without you. But she said, who can say all the rest of my nonsense? Now, she says nonsense when she expresses herself as deeply as this. While I was doing this, she said, my adorable Jesus came. So there she was throwing out all kinds of invitations to him to come. And all goodness, and showing me his heart opened, he said, my daughter, place your head upon my heart and rest. That's Psalm 62. Rest in God, my soul. Rest in God, my soul. And I'll just give you the psalm because it's repeated several times in the psalm. I want to give you Matthew 11, 28 to 30. Come and rest is Jesus' invitation to us. Now, resting in him is first of all entering into his divine will. And secondly, entering into the prayer of contemplation, where you enter into that simple oneness without words, without anything else. So Psalm 62 and Matthew 11, 28 to 30. So place your head on my heart and rest, for you are very tired. Then we will go around together, that I may let you see my I love you. That my should have a capital M according to these writings. Spread over the whole of creation for you. So Luisa said, I embraced him and placed my head upon his heart in order to rest. And I felt an extreme need of this rest. Then afterwards, as I was outside of myself, but always clasped to his heart, he said, my daughter, to you, who are the firstborn daughter of my supreme will, I want to make known how the whole of creation, upon the wings of my eternal volition, brings my I love you to the creatures. And the creatures upon the same wings of my will make it their own. They should give me the requital of their I love you. Now there's a lovely, wonderful introductory piece to rounds of creation. So the Lord has his I love you on absolutely everything, and our rounds are our response to that. Okay. So upon the wings of, my daughter, to you, who are the firstborn daughter of my supreme will, I want to make known how the whole of creation upon the wings of my eternal volition brings my I love you to all of you. and all of you upon the wings of my divine will, making it your own, should give me the requital of your I love you. Look at the azure sky. There's no point in it in which an I love you of mine towards the creature is not impressed. Each star and the glittering that forms a crown around it are studded with my I love yous. Each of the sun's rays extends towards the earth to bring light. Each drop of light carries my I love you. And as the light invades the earth and man looks at it and walks on it, my I love you reaches into his eyes, into his mouth, into his hands, and extends under his feet. The murmuring of the sea murmurs, I love you, I love you, I love you. And all the drops of water are as many keys which, murmuring among themselves, form the most beautiful harmonies of my infinite I love you. My infinite I love you is Jeremiah 31:3. I've loved you with an everlasting love. I think that's a beautiful image, the murmuring of the ocean. The plants, the leaves, the flowers, the fruits have my I love you impressed in them. So the whole of creation brings to man my repeated I love yous. And man, how many of my I love yous does he not have impressed upon his whole being? His thoughts are sealed by my I love you. The beating of his heart that palpitates in his chest with its mysterious sound, tick, 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 is my I love you. I think that's very interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that one, would you? Is my and I love you of mine, which is never interrupted, which says to him, I love you, I love you. His words are followed by my I love you. His movements, his steps, and all the rest contain my I love you of mine. And yet in the midst of so many waves of my love, he's unable to elevate himself to requite my love. What ingratitude, and how grieved my love is left. St. Francis of Assisi, at the last months of his life, was seen by one of the monks in ecstasy. He already had the stigmata at the time, and he was raised up from the ground, and he was shouting. The monk didn't know to whom, because he was on his own on Mount Alverna. Love is not loved, he kept on saying. Love is not loved, love is not loved. Okay. St. John of the Cross said, love can be repaid by love alone. But you know that from your own experience, don't you? Love can be repaid by love alone. No other coinage can be used to repay love. If someone wants to give you a material thing instead of love, it actually hurts. It doesn't help. The material thing given with love is completely different. The value is the love. And the example I always give is of a little child picking your favourite rose wrongly and grabbing it and bringing it into you and saying, Mummy or Daddy, I love you, and showing you the rose. And they know it's your favourite rose. They don't know they've just destroyed it. And what's invaluable is the spontaneous act of the child. And the fact that that child came without being pushed or pulled or anything else to give you this act of love. Every parent knows that that's one of their best times, isn't that right? Yeah, because it's the love you can't buy. And the child deliberately picked up a symbol that you considered important to give it to you. So the gift is the symbol of the love that's actually behind it. So Jesus is saying the whole of creation is merely a symbol of his love. Everything that you can do, everything that you can accomplish, everything you see around you, they're all the I love yous of the Lord. Therefore, my daughter, I have chosen you as daughter of my will, so that as a faithful daughter, you may defend the rights of your father. My love absolutely wants the requital of the love of the creature. I've put that into the... I've put some of the ideas that are here into that little booklet of the rounds of creation. My love absolutely wants it. In my will, you will find all my I love yous, and you, by following them, will impress your I love you within mine. Now, there's something we mightn't think of, that we don't just give him our I love yous, we put them inside of his. That's like saying you put the tiny thing into the big thing. And so they're lost in him. Everything is through him, with him, and in him. and do it for yourself and for all souls. Oh, how content I will be in seeing the love of the creature fused with mine. This is why I give my will into your power, so that one creature defending the rights of my love may requite me for that love which I've given to the whole of creation. Okay. So August the 5th, 1923, Jesus is talking about the two eras, one redemption and the other divine will. Now he comes back to the same theme many times, and each time he adds another piece to it. So when we get to the stage of actually studying this particular theme, you'll realize he builds like a Lego. He keeps one piece one on top of the other. Luisa said I was fusing all of myself in the holy will of God, and my sweet Jesus investing me with a supreme light. That's the divine will. A supreme light. Told me, my daughter, if my supreme will had not let my human will enter into the divine will, my humanity is holy and pure as it is. Notice the present tense. It doesn't say as it was, as it is. Why? Because he's alive in heaven, isn't he? Body and soul. As pure and holy as it is, could not have formed the complete redemption. It needed to be on the divine level. My human will, number one, would have lacked all seeingness, and therefore it would not have been able to see everyone. Number two, it would have lacked immensity and would not have been able to embrace all. Number three, it would have lacked omnipotence and it wouldn't have been able to save everyone. Number four, it would have lacked eternity and it would not have been able to take everything to one single point. Now, as we move on, you see, we're now shifting into the higher volumes. The divine will is going to be called a singularity, one single point. I'm deliberately using the term a singularity. Why? Because the astrophysicists have discovered that beyond the Big Bang, there is a singularity. They're using all the right language. They just can't say G-O-D. But they're using the right language. They've actually gone back to the very beginning. It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Everything is one single point. And because it's one single point, there's neither past nor future in it. Everything is present. That's why you can pray for all souls, past, present, and future. So you take everything as one single point to remedy everything. So the first role in redemption was that of my divine will. The second of my humanity. Look at the order. Because all the value of everything is the divine will. Okay? If it wasn't for the divine will, redemption would have been for few, and it also would have been limited in time. Because not having the light of the all-seeingness, which makes one know everyone, look at that, know everyone, because in the hours of the Passion, Luisa makes it perfectly clear that Jesus had each one of us in mind, and he had each one of our sins in mind to redeem every single one of them, as she said, one by one. I find that absolutely breaks me up. I don't know about you. That every single one of them, it wouldn't be so bad if he did it as one kind of big conglomerate, you know what I mean? One big sweeping brush and you get it all out the door. No, one by one. It's the order and the detail that is absolutely amazing. So he said he wouldn't have had the all-seeing list that makes one know everyone. I could not have extended myself to all, he said. So, in order to form redemption, I did nothing other than open the doors of the divine will to my humanity. Okay, and this is, of course, what we have to do as well. We have to imitate him. He's the model. Doors which the first man had closed with, of course, his act of rebellion. And giving my humanity free field, in other words, God had freedom to do everything. I let it operate the redemption within the very bosom of the supreme will. So all the redemption was done at the higher plane. This is why, if you look at the crucifixion of Jesus from a purely human point of view, it is ludicrous. And you can understand the chief priests and everything mocking him and deriding him, because as far as they're concerned, this man, they knew he had power. They knew he could raise the dead. They knew he could walk on water. They knew all of this. So what on earth was he doing up there? And that's why they kept saying to him, come down from the cross and we'll believe in you. And so since they were only looking at it from a human level, what they were looking at made no sense. Luisa got the extraordinary grace to see the passion from within and to see it from the divine level, and every single iota makes sense. Absolutely every dot and comma, there's not an extra one. Everything makes sense, but only on the divine plane. So, from that time on, no one else has entered my divine volition, that's John 14:12, to be able to operate as the owner. Now, as the owner is, if the divine will possesses you and you possess it, you're the owner. Do you realize what we're saying? You're the owner of God. You possess God. Okay? So you need to put possess God there. And while we can say these things in words, it can take a while for us to actually register this in our innermost being. No one else has entered the divine volition to be able to operate as the owner with full freedom. Now, it's been perfectly clear for these 16 volumes that Luisa is completely free. And Jesus still asks her, do you want to do it? Do you agree? With complete freedom, as if it were his own. Now, when we enter into the divine will, when we fuse in the divine will, we have complete freedom to either go and take the precious blood of the Lamb and use that to redeem the world, or go in and take his wisdom and give that to the political and religious leaders, or whatever you want. You're completely free. It's very interesting to see what people do. I should say it would be if you knew. Because half of us don't understand the freedom we have and don't realise what you can do with all the divine attributes. And since the thing that's needed most on the planet, both with religious as well as political leaders, is wisdom, we need to go in, take the wisdom of God and actually give it to them. Because otherwise this world is going to disintegrate. You operate as the owner and with full freedom, as if it were your own, so as to be able to enjoy all of its power and the goods that it contains. My will in me is like the soul to the body. Look at this now. This is actually very important. And if doing my will has been the greatest grace for the saints, because they were only able to do it, they weren't able to enter in, do you remember? As it entered into them as though by reflections. Why is it by reflections? Because not until Luisa could somebody actually operate at that plane. What will it be? Not only to receive the reflections, but to actually enter into it and enjoy all its fullness. This is why the saints of today will surpass the saints of yesterday. Not that we're better than them humanly, okay? It's just that we have the privilege of operating on a divine level, and the saints must be looking at this little crowd and this little room in absolute marvel. how tiny the creatures are. And we're a small little group of people that the world wouldn't look at a second time. Okay, and we have this extraordinary privilege. Isn't it amazing? So Jesus says, now, if in order to form the redemption it was necessary that my humanity and my will have access to the divine will, so now for the fulfillment of the fiat voluntas tua on earth as it is in heaven, it is also necessary that I open again the doors of my eternal will and I let another creature enter into it, giving her free field. And I let her do, from her greatest to her littlest act, in the all-seeingness, immensity and power of my will. So I want to give you there Song of Songs 5:8. And in Song of Songs 5:8, the bride says to the bridegroom, or maybe it's the bridegroom who says it to the bride, let's go into the vineyards and let's see how the vineyards are doing, and let's go and help. Because the vineyards are the vineyards of the Lord, and they're all the souls that need to be helped. So in all of her acts, but the thing is that in her acts, in the divine will, we operate in the all-seeingness, immensity and power of the divine will. As you enter into it, he said, and emit your thoughts, your words, your works, your steps, your reparations, your pains, your love, your thanksgivings, the supreme volition will coin all your acts. Now, as we go into the higher volumes, this is going to be called divine currency. Okay, will coin all your acts, and they will receive the divine image with the value of divine acts, which being infinite can make up for all, reach all, and have such ascendancy over the divinity as to make the supreme will descend upon the earth, bring its goods, all the goods that it contains. Now, this is absolutely astonishingly amazing. Jesus is using the image of an old coin. Well, I suppose if you had a British coin, it's the same thing. It has the image of the monarch on it. And he says that in the ancient world, the piece of metal, whatever it was, had no value unless the head of the monarch was on it. And if the head of the monarch was on it, then they registered the value of the thing according to the weight of the metal that was in it. Okay. So he's saying that when we enter into the divine will, all our acts turn into these coins because the divine image is on them. Isn't that fantastic? And therefore they have value in eternity. Now, people all around us who have very little faith would think you were mad. Okay. It will happen as to metal, either to gold or silver. Until the image of the king is coined on it, it cannot be given the value of currency. But as soon as it's coined, it acquires the value of currency and it circulates throughout the whole kingdom. There's no town or village or important place in which it does not enjoy the prestige of currency. And there's no creature that can live without it. Whether its metal is vile or precious, it actually doesn't matter as long as the image of the king is impressed on it. That's a very important point. It doesn't matter whether our acts are tiny or big. The thing that's important is that the divine image is imprinted on them. That's what he's saying. So it doesn't matter whether you're blinking your eye or you're saving the world, if I can take two extreme examples. The value is that if the divine image is on that action, that's, you need to put a VIP on that one, okay? And as long as the image of the king is impressed on it, it runs throughout the whole kingdom, enjoys supremacy over all, and makes itself loved and respected by all. In the same way, everything that the soul does in my will, now you need to ring that word everything, that you do it in his will. Since the divine image is coined on it, it runs through heaven and earth. It has supremacy over all. It does not refuse to give itself to whomever wants it, and there's no place at which its benefit effects cannot be enjoyed. Now, how do you save the Muslims? In the divine will, with your divine acts, by sending this divine currency to them. That's all. It's actually very simple. Now, while Jesus was saying this, we prayed together. And Jesus let my intelligence enter into his will. Look what a privilege she has. Together, we offered to the Supreme Majesty the homage, the glory, the submission, and the adoration of all human intelligences. That's a VIP. We have to actually do this ourselves. At the contact with the Supreme Will, a divine image was impressed on the homage. You can't say homages. We'd say on the adoration without the S. And they diffused over all the created intelligence like many speaking messengers, which placed themselves in the order of creation, and all of them, as though in relation, you don't need the S, with the supreme will. They love plurals. But who can say what you could see and understand? My most sweet Jesus added, my daughter, have you seen? Only by entering into my will, that's fusing. Only by entering into my will can this actually happen. Therefore, continue to make your gazes, your words, your heart, and all the rest of you enter into it, and you'll see very surprising things. Then, after spending more than 3 hours in the divine will, doing what Jesus would tell me to do, and together with him, I found myself outside of myself. And who can say everything? I feel that my poor intelligence is incapable, she said, and I'm going to stop here. It's very, very interesting, isn't it? So, now that we've been told what an incredible privilege it is to operate at this level, he's going to bring you down to brass tacks in August the 9th, 1923, and let you know what the human will does. And he's an absolutely divine teacher. He balances everything. So he has you up here, and you've been on a 747, and he brings you right down to earth to let you know that if you get out of that airplane, you're going to fall down. Okay, this is really wonderful. I was fusing myself in the holy divine volition, and my sweet Jesus, clasping me to himself, began to pray together with me, and he told me, my daughter, the human will has covered the whole atmosphere with clouds. Now, we're not really at the worst part yet. We're only at the clouds. In such a way that thick darkness hangs over all creatures. Now, we know there are clouds and clouds. Some clouds are nice and fluffy and they let the light through, no problem. Others are so heavy and black that the whole place goes dark. So he's talking about the human will actually knocking out the light of the divine will. And almost all of them walk limping and groping. Almost all of them, you're talking about the entire population of the planet. He's not talking about any particular group. And each human action that they do without the connection with the divine will intensifies the darkness. Okay? And man becomes more blind. Okay? I want to give you John 9:40-41. Jesus had said at the beginning of John chapter 9, I think it's in verse 2, that I am the light of the world and anyone who follows me will not be walking in darkness. He took a man who had no eye sockets and he created eyes for him and gave him the ability to see. And the scribes and Pharisees, in rejecting Jesus, rejecting this sign, rejecting the light that was coming to them, became darker and darker and persecuted the man that was healed and eventually killed Jesus. And at the end of it, in verses 40 and 41, they said, we're not blind, surely. And Jesus said, if you were blind, I could heal you. But you say you can see, and therefore your sin remains. Now that's conscious, deliberate blindness. That's what you're talking about here. Deliberate blindness. They're doing everything without the connection with the divine will. It intensifies the darkness and man becomes more blind. The reason why I gave you that tiny explanation is because that's what's going on around us in society today. The blindness is almost on a daily basis now. Because the light, the sun for the human will is the divine will. Without the divine will, there is no light for the creature. So that's Ephesians 5:8. And 1 John 1:7, where John tells us to, for God's sake, walk in the light. Okay. So let's come back up to the good level again. But one who operates, prays, and walks in my light, that's 1 John 1:7, walking in the light, rises above this darkness, and as the soul operates, prays, speaks, piercing these thick clouds, she sends flashes of light over all the earth. That's Matthew 5:14-16, letting your light shine. Matthew 5:14-16. Now, notice what he has us doing. He has us piercing that terrible darkness by fusing in the divine will and operating in the divine will. So a small little bit of light gets out over the whole earth and diffuses darkness. And if more and more and more and more of us do it, we can diffuse the darkness altogether. So she sends flashes of light over the whole earth, such as to shake those who live down below at the level of their wills, preparing the hearts to receive the light, the sun of the divine will. So notice that the prayers we do are disposing others to be able to turn back to God. So you're converting them at the level where conversion is absolutely essential, enabling them to see. You're preparing the hearts or disposing the hearts to receive the light, the Son of the divine will. And this is why I so much care that you live in my will, that you may prepare a heaven of light, which sending continuous flashes of light may dispel this heaven of darkness that the human will has formed over its head, in such a way that by possessing the light of my will, they may love the divine will, and my will, which is loved, may reign upon the earth. So I think that's a wonderful explanation there. So I'm going to give you one more, and the reason is it's about our Blessed Mother. Oh, it's very long. Maybe it's too long for this time. Look at the clock and tell me if you want me to do it. Do you want me to do it, all of you? Okay. I just thought it would be nice because on Saturday we'll be talking about our Blessed Lady. Okay. So this, August the 13th, 1923, our Blessed Lady is the seed of the divine will on the earth. Okay. So Luisa said, I felt oppressed because of the privation of my sweet Jesus, and I began to pray, praying him to no longer delay his return to my poor soul, for I couldn't endure any more. And then to my surprise, I saw that he was clinging to my neck. Now that's Song of Songs 2:6. Surrounding me with his arms and with his face touching mine. That's very touching, isn't it? And with the light that he wanted to infuse in my mind. And as though drawn, I kissed him, and it was as if I wanted to reject that light, saying to myself, I love this. Now, this is a temptation at a higher level. If you want to know how the saints are tempted, this is it. She said, now, she has Jesus in her arms. She has everything. He has just kissed her, and she's kissed him. This is it. She says, I don't care about knowing things. I only want to save my soul, and Jesus alone is enough for me. Everything else is nothing. After all the trouble he's gone to try and reveal about the divine will to her and all the disposing of her to come to this point, she says, no, I'm not interested in anything. Now that's a temptation at a very high level, okay? And as Jesus touched my forehead, look where he's touching, okay? I could resist no more, and the light entered into me, saying, my daughter, one who has been called to an office, she's been called to the office of opening the doors of the kingdom of the divine will on the earth, must know the secrets, the importance, the duties, the goods, the founder, and everything that pertains to that office. Otherwise, you can't really have the office. Now, you must know that a simple creature broke the relations which existed between the divine will and humanity. So that's Adam. This split destroyed the plans that the divinity had in the creation of man. Now, another simple creature, though endowed with many graces and privileges, but still a mere creature, the Virgin Queen of all, was given the office to bind again, to cement, I like that word, and to place herself in relation, doesn't need the S, with the will of her creator, in order to repair the first split of that first creature. A woman the first, a woman the second. The first one that broke was Eve. The one who binds is also a woman, but he's also going to bring Luisa in as well. She was precisely the one who, by binding her will to ours, gave back to us the honour, the decorum, the subjection, and the rights of creation. Was it not one creature that received the beginning of evil and formed the seed of the ruin of all generations? Now that lady is Eve. In the same way, this celestial creature, all by herself, received the beginning of good. By placing herself in relation with the will of her Creator, she placed the seed of the eternal fiat. And this is very important. This is the first time we're seeing this. Okay? And NB at the side won't be any harm. She formed the seed of the eternal fiat, which was to be the salvation, the sanctity, and the well-being of all. The seed is the very first thing you plant in the ground. Okay. Now, as this celestial creature kept growing, so did the seed of the eternal fiat grow in her. And as this seed became a tree, in other words, mature, the eternal word first felt captured to rest in the shade of his eternal volition and was conceived, forming his humanity in that virginal womb in which his supreme will reigned as ruling king. Now, I think it's very interesting that the divine will is referred to as the tree of life. Usually Jesus himself is referred to as the tree of life. Okay? But we had it in an earlier volume as well. Do you see then how all goods descend from my supreme will and all evils enter the field when the creature withdraws from the divine will? Had I not found a creature who had my will as life and who placed herself in relation with me, with those bonds of creation wanted by me, I would not have wanted nor been able to descend from heaven and to take on human flesh in order to save them. So my mother was the beginning, you need an NB here, the beginning, the origin, the seed of the fiat voluntas tua in heaven and on earth as it is in heaven. Since one creature had destroyed it, it was just that another creature would rebuild it. Look at the detail that the Lord does. Instead of just wiping something out and starting all over again, he wants the detail of the picture recreated. This is very, very interesting. And my humanity, he said, which never separated from my divinity, upon this seed of my own will, which I found in the Divine Mother, I formed the great plane of the human will in the divine. Now, a plane, according to the dictionary, is a level of existence. I formed this new level of existence where the human will could actually operate in the divine will. So with my human will united to the divine, there was no human act that I did not place in relation to the supreme volition. With the divine will, I was aware of all the acts of all generations. Colour that one. What an unbelievable burden to carry. Wouldn't it be unbelievable to carry all the acts of everybody in this country, let alone any other country, let alone all creatures? An incredible burden. With the human will, I kept repairing them, he said, and I bound them to the eternal volition. This is the redoing of the human person. Okay? This is the redoing of humanity. There was not one act which could escape me, and which was not ordered by me in the most pure light of the supreme will. I could say that redemption cost me little. My eternal life, the pains of my passion, my example, don't need the S, my word would have been sufficient, and it could have been over quickly. But in order to form the great plane of the human will in the divine, this new level of existence of the human will in the divine, and to bind all the relations and links which had been broken by it, I had to place my whole interior, my whole hidden life, and all my intimate pains, which were far more numerous and more intense than my external pains, and which are not yet known. You'll get to know about them much more as you go on. It's enough to say that it was not just forgiveness that I interceded for. It was remission of sins, refuge, escape, defence in all the great dangers of life of man, as I did my passion. But it was the new rising of the whole interior of man. Now, Luisa brings this out in the crowning of Jesus with thorns in the hours of the Passion, that Jesus made reparation for the fall of the intellect, memory, and will, the three great powers of the soul. And so he paid for the resurrection of the intellect, memory, and will with the crown of thorns. So that's the rising of the interior, of humanity. I think it's very important for us to keep repeating that all the time. This is the resurrection to grace of the human race. And we can't have the New Jerusalem at the other end of history without this, that the resurrection to grace has got to happen. I had to make the Son of the eternal will rise, which binding his is the humanity, his whole interior with enrapturing power, even his most intimate fibres, would lead him into the womb of my celestial Father as though reborn to his eternal will. That is, reborn to resurrection and glory. But it's on this earth. It's not after death. You see, before divine will, we all knew that the resurrection was after death. But with the divine will, the resurrection is now. And each time we fuse in the divine will and do our acts in the divine will, every single one of them is a step into resurrection and glory. Every single one. And that's what encourages people to do more and more of them. Oh, how much easier it was for me, Jesus said, to impetrate man's salvation than to reorder his interior in my supreme volition. Just taking that, you have reared children, and you know how extremely difficult it is to get someone to change their mind about something. Even if they're completely wrong, and even if they know they're completely wrong, it's still very difficult to do it, because human beings are very stubborn, holding on to their own opinion and their own position. So no, you can't imagine, I won't ask you to, can you imagine? How did Jesus try and get to do that for the whole of humanity for all time? I mean, the pain must be something that is completely incomprehensible to us. The price that he would have to pay. So how much easier it was for me to impetrate his salvation than to reorder his interior in my supreme volition. And had I not done this, redemption would not have been complete, nor a work worthy of God. Don't put A, knock out the A, that's not English. I would have neither balanced nor ordered all the accounts of man, nor would I restored him to that sanctity which he had lost by withdrawing from the divine will and by breaking his relations with it. The plain is already done. This new level of existence of the human will in the divine is already done. Jesus has done it. But in order to make it known, first it was necessary for man to know that with my life and passion he could obtain forgiveness and salvation. They're the first steps of the ladder. In order to dispose him to know how I had impetrated for him the highest and the most important thing, the new rising. This is spiritual resurrection. The new rising of his will in mine. And that's why he says that for somebody who has finally entered the divine will 24/7, 365 and is not leaving it at all, he says it's a new baptism. That it's you've actually risen from the dead. So I impetrated the earlier things in order for him to receive the most important thing, the new rising of his will in mine, to give back to him his nobility and the relations with my will which had been broken and with it his state of origin. Now, my daughter, if my eternal wisdom disposed that one celestial creature, the holiest of all, would prepare the seed of my holy will, in which I had formed the plane of the new rising of man in my supreme will, now, through another creature, by letting her enter the eternal dwellings of my will and binding her will to mine, this is Luisa, uniting her to all my acts, I make her whole interior rise again in the eternal sun of my will, opening the field of this plane, this new level of existence, opening it up to all generations. Luisa had to allow it to happen in her first, and then he opens it up to all generations. Just as redemption started through Blessed Mother and then completed by Jesus, and then it's opened up to everybody else. But she had to receive the whole of redemption first. Luisa has to receive the whole of the divine will first. And then you open up this new level of existence to all generations, so that whoever wants it can enter into it to place himself in relation to the will of God. So notice the little bit that you read in Tony's little booklet is, if you want it, I'll do it. Now all we have to do is actually want to go into it. And if until now souls have enjoyed the goods of redemption, now they will move further to enjoy the fruits of the fiat voluntas tua on earth as it is in heaven. I don't know why they don't finish that in Latin all the time. It doesn't make sense to me to put it half Latin and half English. He said, what is being restored to them is that lost happiness, that's paradise regained. Paradise is the human person in union with the divine. That lost happiness, that dignity and nobility, that peace, all celestial. Now that celestial peace is Philippians 4:7. The peace that passes all understanding and guards the heart and the mind in Christ Jesus. And also Isaiah 62:3. Isaiah 62:3. You will keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on you. So that peace, all celestial, which by doing his will man had caused to disappear from the face of the earth. Now you can observe with very little effort that the more our society moves away from God's will, the more unpeaceful they are, the more belligerent, the more angry, the more upset, the more dark, the more disturbed they are. And it's obvious, you don't have to even go very far to see it, because it's everywhere around us. And what they've lost is that paradisical happiness, the dignity and nobility that God gave to us, and the peace that passes all understanding. Greater grace, Jesus said, I could not give humanity, because by placing man again in relation with my will, I give back to him all the goods with which I endowed him in creating him. Therefore be attentive, because this is about opening a large field of goods for all your brothers. In other words, this is about opening a new era. I think that's a good place to stop.
Yeah.